Yo, what's poppin', Low Gang? Today, we're back on the Bagel Boy channel. That's right, the Bagel Boy brand once again rises out of the ashes in order to bring you a, I guess, director's commentary-esque video on videos that I've made. It is currently 8:05 p.m. on January 14th, 2023. It has been 9 hours since I have uploaded the do-it-yourself video. Not getting as many views or as positive as a reception that I would have liked, but that's a story for another day. But for now, I'm still satisfied with just having another project out and it getting, it's 2 out of 10, so it didn't fail. And I'm still in a pretty good mood. I watched episode 2 of Onimai today. Come on, a day you watch the new episode of Onimai cannot be a bad day. It's just not physically possible. So I decided, hey, you know what, I'm up for it. It's time to do the commentary for the Call of the Night video. Now, the Call of the Night video is probably why you're here in the first place, considering that I currently only have 960 subs, give or take. Haven't checked it in like a couple hours. And yeah, it's why you're here, because before I uploaded that video, I had around 207 subscribers the day I uploaded it, and I think my channel had maxed out at 210, but I had lost some during my hiatus. I might be getting that wrong. I'm going completely off of memory, and I have a terrible memory, so hey, don't trust anything I said, that's right. And after uploading that video, I I quickly started gaining more subs, and I was at like at 600 by the time I uploaded my next video, and I obviously am now at 960. And how that happened is that the video blew up to the point where randos on Twitter were talking about it, and I was getting pinged in them, or like friends would come up to me and be like, yo, this random Twitter dude, yeah, he just talked about you and like bumped your video to all his followers, and I was like, yo, that's based, that's awesome, I'm finally relevant. It has, I'm not sure if I already said the view count, but 21,000 views. That's not a number to scoff at. Funnily enough, though, when I first uploaded it, I was convinced that the video had bombed, because it started off debuting on my list as a 9 out of 10. Now, if you don't know, YouTube has this 1 through 10 list of all the videos that you've uploaded recently, your 10 most recent videos, and if you do well, you're number 1 on that list. So if you get a bunch of views, number 1 out of 10. But if you do bad, you get a 10 out of 10, and you never won a 10 out of 10. Now, luckily, it wasn't a 10 out of 10, but it was a 9 out of 10, and I was very not happy about that. I even tried changing the title and toyed with the idea of changing the thumbnail, but I'm very glad I didn't do that, because it ended up being very beneficial for the channel. Funnily enough, though, this video's development was absurdly troubled. I mentioned this in the last director's commentary, if you will. Most of my videos end up like this, where there's a point where it seems like it's about to fall apart. The DIY video surprisingly didn't have that, but this is the video that probably had the most, I wouldn't say hectic. The Urusei Yatsura video probably had the most hectic production. But in terms of nearly falling apart, the Call of the Night video is absolutely the one that was the nearest to completely failing. It's a very funny story, so without further ado, let's get into it. Now, if you look at the community posts that I posted a little after the Tomozaki video first went up, I basically announced the new production of a new video. It was supposed to be a quickie on Call of the Night. A quickie. Emphasis on quickie. I said it was gonna be 8 minutes long in that community post. It is 35. It did not go to plan at all. Because in my mind, right, So my mind going into this, I had this video planned since before the Tomozaki video even came out. Pretty much as soon as I had finished Call of the Night, I wanted to make a video on it because I like the show, and because I had this one thing that I knew I alone could talk about, because no one else was bringing it up, or if they were doing it in a very limited context. Which is that Itamura directed Monogatari, and he directed Call of the Night, and some of the tics that he learned from Monogatari, he also used in Call of the Night. Very simple premise for a video. And that was like, I want to make that video because I'm a huge Studio Shaft fan, I know all about them, I'm more knowledgeable about Studio Shaft than your average Joe, yeah? So I was like, I can make this video, and it'll be very distinct. No one else has made it before, to my knowledge. And, there's a niche there. Something I really wanted to do before that video, but especially after I made it, and now, is do more research-based videos on anime. Because previously, up to that point, I had made solely opinion pieces. But this was the first time I really went in on, the production side and, how certain things got into the show and why the show is the way it is within the context of it being a product being created rather than just, oh, it's here for a narrative purpose. I wanted to go deeper and go hey, this guy has a propensity for doing this thing in these shows, and it's also in this show. And this was my first foray into that field, and I was very confident. I was like, yo, I'm a Shaft fan, I can do this. Well, I did do it, but the road was much, much harder than I initially expected. So the first order of business was to do, not only rewatch certain parts of the show, because I wanted a refresher on some of those directorial tics, but also to do research on the Shaft Exodus. The plan in my mind was to talk about the Shaft Exodus, talk about the context of Call of the Night existing in that season, and how other shows from Studio Shaft, like Luminous Witches and Ruby, don't really have the Studio Shaft style, but Call of the Night does have some remnants of that style, if you will. And then I would go into the directorial tics, do a brief outro, and then be done. And I thought, somehow I thought that would take 8 minutes. Which is dumb. No, there was no way that was going to fit into an 8-minute video. What were you thinking? But I ended up doing a bunch of research on the Studio Shaft Exodus. What I quickly realized is that this was going to be way harder than I initially thought, because most of the people talking about the Shaft Exodus weren't citing their sources well, were just sort of spitballing, citing tweets. I eventually found Kaven and Sakuga blog talk about specific people who left Shaft, and I formed a list on a notepad document of all the people that I had heard people cite full name who had left Shaft, and then I looked at them individually on Anime News Network and my anime list and Annie list and corroborated all of it between the three of them and was like, okay, so these are the shows they worked on, this is when they left Shaft, yada yada. But it took so long to find Kaven and Sakuga blog, because I wasn't acquainted with them beforehand. And most of the rando anime blogs that I saw were just not citing sources, and were just talking in vagaries about how, oh yeah, there was a Shaft staff exodus. And I'm like, okay, but who? But when? But why? And those didn't give correct answers. Or rather, they just, some of them were correct, but it was I couldn't verify that they were correct based on the information they provided. But luckily, I got through it. I did more research on how they rush out their shows, and I was slowly getting acquainted with Studio Shaft. And so I started scripting the video. I was like, okay, I know enough about it now, I can do the video. Obviously, I had also rewatched some episodes of the show. But, so I did a draft of the video, and I did a few redrafts, and at first I was very confident. But I started to overthink it. or so I told myself. I was merely overthinking it. And I was like, this anxiety is just, I don't want to be wrong. It's probably nothing. It's probably just me doing my overthinky-thonky. I should have listened to my inner voice, but alas, I did not. And I continued, I forged ahead and it continued making the video. I remember that I did the initial draft of the script in 2 days, mostly the first half of it was done at home, and the second half was done at Barnes & Noble. Literally, I went to Barnes & Noble, went to the cafe, got some good shit, and then they don't have any chargers at the Barnes & Noble that I go to, or at least none in the cafe. So what I did was I went over next to the restrooms, and there's an outlet in the wall right next to the drinking fountain, and I put my laptop cord right there and started typing away, and got weird looks from all the workers there. But they just overlooked me. I guess I was just going so ham on that keyboard that they permitted me to stay. And I went ham right in the script, then redrafted it a few times. It was a very quick process for the script. It shouldn't have been. It should not have been a quick process considering how much research should have gone into the video, but, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I ended up editing the video, and this video has the record for, I think, the most minutes of video that I have edited in a single day. There might have been, the Tomozaki video might have beaten it out near the end, but I think this has the record, where I edited 13 or 14 minutes of it in a single day/night. I was just put on all the podcasts. I remember distinctly, I put on the Mr. Beast Colin and Samir interview, which was getting me fired up about posting to YouTube, right? And so within a few days, it had been edited. Well, I say a few days. It was probably more like a week, but whatever. And, I was ready to post. I was like, okay, I can do this. I can post this. I think my initial due date was November 23rd, if I recall correctly. It might have been the 21st. It might have been way off that. I'm spitballing based off of my memory. It might not be accurate. But nonetheless, you can go to my Twitter and see when I posted it and what day I cited, because I still have those tweets up. And I was ready to post, or so I thought. There was a complete draft of the video, but then I was like, that section might need a bit of work. I think I, sort of didn't say it as accurately as I could, and then I looked at another section. I was like, okay, so maybe that one needs more work, and I looked at all the directorial tics that I cited about the show, and I was like, okay, so that needs more work, and then I looked at the whole video, and I was like, damn, this video is awful! It was terrible! It wasn't a good video! And the reason why was because I was stingy about doing a bunch of research. So there were so many things wrong with this initial version of the video that I will never release. I don't even think I have the file anymore, but I might still have it, but nonetheless, it was just, God, people who are friends with me know how it went at the time, how comical. The fact that I wanted it up in November, and I had to wait until December 13th, if I'm getting that right, December 13th to actually get the video out. So, some of the problems of the video include just terrible points, first of all. So one of the things I cited as a Studio Shaft tick, if you will, is the use of non-diegetic backgrounds. And what I mean by that is how sometimes in Call of the Night, the characters will be like these little, I guess, not even bobblehead, I don't know, sort of like chibi-ified versions of themselves, oftentimes over like these red polka dot backgrounds or like with patterns or whatever. And occasionally, they will have weird coloring. Now, the weird coloring probably comes from Shaft. Like, even to this day, I think it comes from Shaft, right? I think that is a Shaft tick that he was incorporating into Call of the Night. But I also made the weird point, just plain bizarre, that, oh yeah, these non-diegetic backgrounds, period, come from Studio Shaft. Those come from manga adaptations as a whole. those are just a thing that anime does. What were you saying? And I was like, okay, so maybe that point is a bit tenuous. So I moved on to the next point. And it was this bit about how the screen has this habit. Itamura throughout the show makes the screen sway in this very particular way. And it's also used very frequently in Monogatari. Now, in my heart of hearts, I feel like I was onto something here. Because Monogatari uses it very frequently. And so does Call of the Night. But it's also just a thing that shows have. The frequency of it probably means that Itamura got it from Studio Shaft, but it's like kinda tenuous and weird to use as a point. Another thing that bothered me about the initial draft of the video is that I was sort of ignoring a lot of very obvious tics. And the reason why I ignored them was because it had just been a while since I saw the show. I watched it for the podcast, and then I took like a break, multiple month-long break from even thinking about the show in order to make my Tomazaki video. And then coming back to it, I watched 2 episodes. But those 2 episodes don't contain nearly all the tics, right? I forgot about the fucking head tilt in episode, I think, 9. Yeah, episode 9, when Sari is talking about how she wants to murder the human, and she has that head tilt. I didn't even mention that in the first draft of the video, which is just insane to me, thinking back on it. Another thing that bothered me about the video, the initial draft, is that I was trying to... Okay, so for reference, I don't talk about cinematography very often, because this is just not a field I'm very acquainted with. I'm slowly getting to grips with it. Today, even, I put up a Twitter thread about the new episode of Onimai, and talked about some of the very unique angles it uses, and the propensity of using fisheye distortion. And it uses it very frequently, and how the camera feels like it's placed physically in the setting very frequently, and how that lends it a sense of realism. But back then, I was much less eloquent when it came to talking about cinematography, and this was the first time that I had ever talked about it in a video. Back in ye olden days, the most eloquent I could get about cinematography was saying, well, that's a boring panning shot. Oh, well, that's a slightly more exciting shot. Or, oh, that's atypical, I guess. You know, I guess that's a creative shot, but I didn't really know how to phrase it properly. And the Call of the Night video was really me... Well, in the first draft of the video, I sort of I basically... My strategy was to admit that I don't talk about cinematography that much, and then sort of spitball about what it might be, and what might make it Shaft-related or whatever. And I said that it might have to have something to do with the frequency of the cutting, which is true in some shots, but not for the show as a whole. And I realized that rewatching the video, and I was like, oof, wait, hold on, I want to redo that. Another thing that bothered me about the rough draft of the video is that okay, so for reference, before this, before going in depth to really redo the video, I didn't really know much about Akiyuki Shinbo's involvement with the studio. There's a lot of competing interpretations, and in my mind, it wasn't super important. Well, it was. And I ended up doing a bunch of research in order to confirm certain things later on down the line. But in the first draft of the video, I was like, well, this isn't that important. And I very strongly emphasized that just for Monogatari, right? At least for Monogatari, Shinbo didn't have as much involvement as Itamura. And I don't think I cited a reason why. I just said... I think I said the most popular interpretation, which is an appeal to popularity fallacy, just blatantly in the script. I didn't explain at all why Shinbo didn't have as much involvement as Itamura, which is dumb. Yeah, God, the initial draft of the script was in shambles, and the reason why it turned out that way as I said in the Tomozaki video, I tend to overthink things. And the feeling that overthinking gives, at least me, is this sense of anxiety that, oh, hey, something might be wrong. Let's think about it a little harder to ensure that nothing is wrong. But there's good overthinking and there is bad overthinking. And good and bad overthinking are the same feeling. So when I make, for instance, my Urusei Yatsura video, I was overthinking the part where I said that the show was very chaotic. And I released the video with that point there, and now I don't overthink it anymore, because I'm like, hey, it turned out fine. I think about the point now, and it's a perfectly adequate point. I think I did a good job on that point, right? But, you know, before I released the video, I still had that feeling of anxiety. Meanwhile, in parts of the Tomozaki video, like Chapter 6, where I said that Kikuchi is bad at communicating, I also felt that sense of anxiety. And that was a good piece of overthinking, because it told me that that section of the video was wrong, and that the logic wasn't properly connecting. The feeling of logic, in my own words, not properly connecting, is that vague feeling of anxiety. But it's hard to always know when that anxiety is a good thing or when it is a bad thing, or when I should follow it or when I shouldn't follow it. And during the Call of the Night video, I was in my overthinking was worse than it probably ever will be. And I told myself, well, these are just lies. I'm just overthinking it. Don't think about it anymore. Don't think about the possibility that you're wrong. But I was wrong. It's not even like all of these would have been video breaking. Me emphasizing very strongly that at least for Nisei Monogatari, because I intentionally left the possibility of Akiyuki Shinbo not having that much involvement in other Shaft shows open, because I felt like it was irresponsible to suggest that he actually had a ton of involvement in every other show, just not Monogatari. Because I had heard a lot of competing things, and I was like, oh, well, those aren't Monogatari, those aren't Call of the Night, I don't need to research that for the video. But it is kind of the story. I even say at the beginning of the video, it's a story. This is the story of a man named Tomoyuki Itamura, a studio named Shaft, and of how Monogatari and Call of the Night are connected. Doing that research will objectively benefit the video, the quality of the information, and the story. People are here for the story of learning how Studio Shaft works. That's really the appeal of the video. That's why it couldn't be 8 minutes, because the appeal of the video is that I'm going ham on telling you all about Studio Shaft. That's the hook. That's what people are there for. That's what keeps them watching. They get to learn more about their favorite studio. So why wouldn't I do a bunch of research on Shaft? And looking at all that, and all the various iffy points in the video, and all the points that I wanted to make but didn't make in the initial draft of the script, I dedicated myself to making sure the information in this video was as good as it possibly could be. And admittedly, I got really demotivated after that, because I had pulled an all-nighter to get this video out, and went to bed and woke up the next morning and was like, this is terrible. It felt almost like my work was in vain, but I stuck it out, right? I don't think there was ever a point where the video necessarily, where I was thinking of scrapping it, but there was definitely a part of me that was like, holy shit, I feel terrible right now. I don't even want to work on this anymore. But I'm so glad I stuck it out, because it really did turn out to be a good video. Now, the research that I did involved rewatching certain parts of the show, being like, okay, so these are the Shaft ticks that I saw while rewatching bits of the show while editing it, just due to the nature of clip selection. I had found them and was like, oh yeah, that's a Shaft tick I forgot about. And so I put those in the script, and those were the freebies. Those were the ones where it was very easy to integrate back into the script. There was a bit of rewatching of Shaft shows in order to see, exactly where they are and see examples through various shows. But otherwise, those were easy. Being a Shaft fan means that you can recognize them right away. The hard part, there were 2 hard parts. The first hard part was learning that Akiyuki Shinbo is he's involved in every single show, right? Every single show that Shaft produces. But he also never directs alone. There's always someone else there, like Tomoyuki Itamura, or Yukihiro Miyamoto, or Naoyuki Tatsuya. Those are the three people I cite in the video. Word for word, I reversed the order, but otherwise I got them right. And also Tatsuya Oishi. Oishi's there, and there's some other people too. Gekidan Inukuri, although he actually isn't involved in any Shaft shows with Shinbo in them, but he is nonetheless a director at Shaft, but I digress. The point is, Shinbo never directs alone. Meanwhile, these other people have fewer shows on their plate. And I looked at that and I was like, okay, so what seems likely is that Shinbo has less involvement on these shows than the other guys. But it took a lot of research to really be like, okay, so here, I literally went through the career of Naoyuki Tatsuya and was like, okay, so he worked on this, and that. Those are what he directed. And meanwhile, Shinbo was working on this, and that, and whole lot of other things, and his name is associated with everything. And judging from that, Naoyuki Tatsuya was most likely doing a bunch of work on these shows, whereas Shinbo was doing a little bit of work in everything to make sure that everything fit the Shaft style. And, I looked at Tomoyuki Itamura and how he focused solely on Monogatari once he got the IP save for a single episode of Sangatsu no Lion. And I looked at that and was like, okay, so this seems to suggest it, but then the nail in the coffin, maybe that's the wrong word to use, but the wrong term rather. But I found this 300-page college thesis on Studio Shaft. I downloaded it as a PDF file because I want to read it in full someday. I still haven't, but someday I want to read it in full. But nonetheless, I perused some of its contents just out of curiosity, and this was really what told me, it enlightened me a lot about Studio Shaft's structure. This is what I was referring to when I say in the video that there's a lot I'm not getting into, especially with that and also the specifics of Shinbo's, what he brings to the table in terms of, like, how he, basically what specific influence he has on each of the shows. I merely get into how much each person influenced each show in the video, because that's what's relevant to the story. But what I found out is that Shaft has this almost, like, sort of training system where people are introduced to the studio. They, work as, like, maybe an animator, one of the lower positions, then they do maybe an episode directing here and there, then they become a full director, and they're sort of like trained into the style. And what a bunch of people were saying about Shinbo that I could never find confirmation for until that moment was that they say a bunch of people on Sakuga blog, just randomly in Reddit threads, were saying that Shinbo is more of a mentor figure to the for the entire studio. He mentors people in this style, then they do their own things with it, and they are largely left to their own devices, with Shinbo there to make sure that it fits the studio brand. And this study, this fucking college thesis, was what finally got me to be like, okay, I believe this narrative completely. That is enough evidence for me. Because what it showed was that, hey, there's like a very specific structure here. Nobody ever is brought in as a director for the first time except Shinbo. Other people are slowly being, they're gradually fading into the style and then direct. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. It all clicks together. I finally get what Shinbo's role here is. Or at least as close as I can, given the information provided. Because another thing that sort of held this video back was that there just isn't a lot of definitive evidence about a lot of things. There's a lot of speculation. It's very informed speculation, but nonetheless, it was very... It's definitely a bit irritating, especially as someone who overthinks everything, to not have definitive proof of a lot of things. But you want to know what was even more scary? Having to figure out what Itamura's sense of cinematography is. Because I just knew in my soul, from the deepest pits of my soul, I knew that Itamura had a specific sense of cinematography that differed from the manga that came from Monogatari. And I needed to figure out what it was. Because, I've seen the manga, I even did comparisons for the first draft of the video to figure out those things. And I realized, there's differences here. There are very clear ones. But I didn't really know what they were. And I put my nose to the grindstone. I did an infinite there were so many days just comparing not only the manga and the anime, but also the anime to other anime, because like I said, I don't talk about cinematography that often, and it's not really on my brain all the time. And so it was sort of like learning from the ground up how to tackle talking about cinematography. I needed to look, I did comparisons with Barakamon, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, Tomazaki, Gabriel Dropout. I did comparisons to Gabriel Dropout and its manga, just to know what another adaptation looks like, just to know, okay, how does the adaptation of this material compare to the adaptation of this material? I did so much work just to figure out the one thing, the one measly point, is that Tomoyuki Itamura likes to show things at a horizontal angle from far away, with emphasis on the background. Yeah, that was a lot of work for barely any point. In the end, though... Hold on, I'm gonna get a sip of water. In the end, although it was so annoying to do that work, and very disheartening at times, and, the first half of that video was so work-focused, and then the second video was a lot of me not wanting to work on it, and putting it off, and then working on it for an hour a day, when really I should have been putting my nose to the grindstone even harder, and doing more work. But nonetheless, I'm glad I did it, because now, instead of having a video that will forever be flawed, I have a video that was temporarily delayed for half a month, but that eventually did come out, and that thus far doesn't have any errors. The closest thing to an error in that video is when I say that Call of the Night was the best directed anime of that year, when now I would consider that to be Bocchi. But at the time, funny story, I watched Bocchi a few days before the video came out. I watched 7 episodes of it for the podcast. Well, I had seen the first episode beforehand, but that was when, I had forgotten about it and its immaculate directing. But I watched those 6 episodes, rather, for the podcast, a few days before I released the Call of the Night video. But when rewatching the video, I didn't think too hard about that line when I heard it. And then, when I uploaded the video, a few hours after it was uploaded, I remembered, wait, hold on, Bocchi. And then I botched all over the place. Yeah, but that's not even really a flaw. That's so funny that I'm kinda glad I made that error, because not only does it not matter for the information in the video, but it's a really hilarious story to talk about. I'm smiling as I tell it to you right now, because I do find it very amusing. I mean, it kinda hurts as a overthinker, being the overthinky thonky that I am, but nonetheless, I find it funny. The funniness overrides the overthinking. So, at first, the video was 9 out of 10, as I mentioned before, but it gained a lot of traction. Before the video came out, Spuddle was telling me in voice call, because we were talking for the podcast, go to Castaway Anime. It was a very fun podcast, and I was talking to him about this new video that I was coming up with. I had just finished the Tomozaki one and uploaded it, and I was talking to Spuddle about it, and he told me that video's gonna blow up. Because Spuddle, he's very algorithm brained, more so than I am, and he taught me a lot about the YouTube algorithm while we were in voice call. And he told me that video's a banger, that's gonna blow up, that is a banger subject. And he was right. And in retrospect, yeah, it is kind of apparent. Funnily enough, the original title for that video was Call of the Night is So Shaft. That is a garbage title. I did get some comments about the current title, because it is a little baity. I talk about how Monogatari and Call of the Night, or rather, no, how Monogatari influenced Call of the Night. And in a literal sense, it is influence, because it's the same director, and the director got a lot of his style from Monogatari. But some people, especially in the Call of the Night forums, were like, this is a little misleading. It's just the same director. That's different from a show getting influenced from another show. But I was like, yeah, but the director got influenced from the show, which then influenced Call of the Night. So the title is technically correct. Overall, I'm very glad that I titled it that because it got so many views. Even if it is a little baity, I think most people are able to overlook the bait and be like, yo, it's a banger video though, and I understand that he had to do it for the algorithm purposes. A very interesting thing I noticed very early into the video's reception is that on the Monogatari subreddit, it was doing really well, because I post all my videos to Reddit. Even though I hate Reddit, I post them there because it's a great place to self-advertise. Always put your videos on Reddit. It's the best decision I have ever made, deciding to go on Reddit and post my shit there. But I put the video on the Call of the Night subreddit and the Monogatari subreddit, because I was like, this is a positive video on both shows. I like both of them. The people on both subreddits are gonna go wild for it. It's gonna get all the upvotes. But weirdly enough, on the Monogatari subreddit, it got like 35 upvotes or something like that, and on the Call of the Night subreddit, I think it got like 15? Maybe even less than that. And the reason for that discrepancy, you could say, well, hold on, the Monogatari subreddit is bigger. Of course it's going to get more upvotes. I'm actually not sure if it's bigger. I think it's bigger because the show is bigger, but I'm actually not entirely sure now that I say that. You can check for me. But what I thought was interesting is that while the Monogatari comments on the post were wholly positive, the ones on the Call of the Night subreddit were actually mostly lukewarm, I would say, because most of the people were fine with the video, but they had an issue. They felt like I was taking credit away from Call of the Night. They never said it so eloquently, but what I realized was that they felt like I was taking credit away from their show. Because I do say, Monogatari influenced Call of the Night. And they read it as me saying, Monogatari, this more popular show, is the reason why their less popular show is good in the first place, which was not the intention, but people couldn't help but see it that way because of how the video is titled and how it's advertised. Because yeah, Monogatari has way more presence in the thumbnail and title. I give it more emphasis because it is the bigger show, because marketing-wise, that is the more strategic choice. Well, it's the more strategic and good choice for YouTube, but for the Call of the Night subreddit, giving Call of the Night more of the credit would have gotten it more upvotes, because they're more conducive to, like, they would look at that and say, wow, thank you for giving our show so much credit, you're baller. That's why people would nitpick me and say, well, hold on, it didn't influence the show. Or why one person said, no, Monogatari had nothing to do with this, that's just Itamura's style. Which is wrong, by the way. Itamura got his style from Monogatari and from Shaft. He was raised as a director there. To think that those didn't come from Monogatari and Shaft would just be so backwards logic. But nonetheless, someone did critique me in that way and said, look, Monogatari, nothing to do with it. Just shout out Itamura, my boy. Shout out Itamura and Call of the Night only. And I find that fascinating. Like, I'm not mad at all. I don't care. but I'm enraptured by that because it's such... I didn't even consider that possibility going into the video because I was like, oh, well, both subreddits are going to love it. Both audiences are going to love it equally because I talk about both of their shows in a very high regard. I even say that Call of the Night's directing is better than a lot of the Monogatari series, but then I follow it up by saying I think Ogi Formula is better directed than Call of the Night. So I'm putting them around the same level. But nonetheless, there is a difference in how each audience perceived it. And that's just so cool to me. That's why, even though it's such a pointless tangent, I find it super cool. And that's why I'm sharing it with you. And of course, you know the story from there. You probably came from that video. It got super big on everywhere. 21,000 views. Vlusky is seething because I now have twice his subscribers. Fuck. I was very happy. In terms of why I think the video did well, obviously it's about Monogatari and Call of the Night, two very popular shows, but I also think it's just an evergreen, always fascinating topic. When I talk about Urusei Yatsura, well, that's going to be slightly outdated. Granted, my points don't just go away or stop being good once there's more episodes of the show out, but that's sort of like relying more heavily on seasonal, short-term relevancy. Whereas with the Call of the Night video, it's informative, it's something that people will always find interesting to talk about. The shows had finished airing long ago, so it's, you know, evergreen in that sense. I was talking about both shows in their entirety. And yeah, it's just a really interesting subject and something that I've learned, especially today with the DIY video about video marketing, is that those evergreen topics are the ones that do the best. I have a video idea in mind right now that I'm going to I'm going to bank on it to give me a bunch of views. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want anyone sniping the idea. I don't want any idea thieves here. Nobody has done this video before, and I want to be the one to make the first one to get all the views and all the revenue from it. But until then, you'll be waiting for that evergreen video that's super informative about a certain studio that people have been talking about a lot lately. So look forward to that. And yeah, I think most of the video is just that it's, like, most of why it did good is because it's so informative, so interesting, and so it's conducive to word-of-mouth spread, because it is such an interesting topic. Any Call of the Night fan or Monogatari fan will get something out of this, and even if they disagree with my opinion on the show, they'll still be like, well, hold on, this guy's got something here, he's doing the research. The only thing I wouldn't even say dislike, because it kind of had to be this way in a sense, is that my personality is not in the video a whole lot. Which I know sounds weird, because the visuals have a ton of personality in their editing. But in terms of script, it's mostly me telling the story. There's a bit of analysis of the shows, and of me saying like, oh, this is why this happened. And there's a bit of me giving my opinion near the end, where I talk about how the directing compares in terms of quality, but and also me talking about what I overall liked about the show. But otherwise, it is very, very cut and dry, in a sense. I mean, I did my best to integrate my personality into it. It's not lacking in personality entirely. It's not just a dry historical recollection or something that a scientist would put out as a study. But nonetheless, it has much less personality than something like my Urusei Yatsura video or even my DIY video, where it's entirely me talking, me being the narrator. Look at me, guys! The one part of the video that does have tons of personality, though, and that I still think was the perfect way to end it, was it has like a minute's worth of setup for the best punchline ever, right at the end of the video where I say, actually Shaft has fixed nothing. That is like peak cynicism, and super funny. I love that. And yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for this commentary. I know that this is even longer than the video itself. It is stupidly long. You probably tabbed out and did homework in the background, and that's okay. There's no way you could ever justify watching this in its entirety, just staring at a still image the whole time. But yeah, if you stuck with me this entire time and hopefully found it fascinating, I'd love if you commented, went to my other channel, watched all my videos, watched my podcast. You'll probably, if you're deep enough down the crunchy rabbit hole to go to this channel, you'll probably know my main channel and you're probably in my Discord, let's be real. And you maybe even went onto the Castaway Anime podcast at this point, so maybe shilling is pointless when you're this deep down the rabbit hole. At 1,000 subs, I've never announced this before, but I guess I can reward you for your time. I plan on setting up a Patreon soon, or rather the Patreon is already set up. It's just that I haven't linked to it yet. And I plan on making a video announcing it, or rather not an entire video announcing it, but rather putting it at the end of my next video, probably the Zaragoto review, assuming I get 1,000 subs before then. But yeah, until then, you're just gonna not be able to give me money for basically nothing. Yay! Without further ado, thank you for listening. You probably listened instead of watching, let's be real. And yeah, hope you have a nice day. I'm having a fun day. Bye-bye.